This is a virtual event. As you just heard, this meeting will be recorded at permission of the speaker. First, I would like to welcome everyone at this hour. Thank you for joining. This will be a pretty busy event, so we ask everyone to be on mute and only raise your hand or pose a question in the chat if you would like to ask something. I would like to give special thanks to my co-host, Zach Rubin of Johnson & Johnson, who represents the Agile community of the company, the community of practitioners and enthusiasts. He made this also available along with me by offering the media channel, a high capacity media channel. Next, I would like to introduce and pave the road for the very special speaker of today's event, Mr. Nicolas Chaillan, who is the first Chief Software Officer of the United States Air Force. He is also a co-lead for the Department of Defense Enterprise DevSecOps initiative with the Department of Defense CIO. He is also responsible for enabling the Air Force programs in the transition to Agile and DevSecOps. Mr. Chaillan is also responsible for evaluation and authorization of newly commercially available off-the-shelf software and cloud-related technologies to help with the adoption of across various Agile Air Force programs. Prior to current position, Mr. Chaillan was the Special Advisor to the Cloud Security and DevSecOps at the Department of Defense, as well as a Special Advisor to Cybersecurity and Chief Architect of the Department of Homeland Security. In addition to his public service, Mr. Chaillan is also a technology entrepreneur, software developer, cyber expert, and inventor, as well as the advisor and speaker at industry conferences and public events. And we're honored to have him today here at our own event. So without any further ado, Mr. Nicolas Chaillan, I'm gonna pass the baton over to you, and you have the floor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Gene, and thank you for having me. This is exciting for us to be able to share what we are doing with Kubernetes and Istio and DevSecOps, and more broadly, Agile across the Department of Defense. So we'll go over a few slides and we'll take a few questions as well. Just wanted to set the stage so people can understand the complexity of what we're doing. Obviously, as you can imagine, we must rapidly adapt to challenges and events while working as a team, a pretty large team that's using a lot of different technologies and that we need to bring with us. And I'm trying to see if the slide is updating. Here we go. And even to space. And with quite a few sensors, making this very easy to scale. And of course, with their help across multiple nations and thousands, if not millions of people across DoD. So I wanted to give a quick introduction on the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps initiative. It's a joint team across all the services and OSD, and it's really aiming to help the adoption of DevSecOps across DoD by weapon systems, business systems, cyber offense defense systems. So really across every part of DoD. The key aspect for us was to avoid vendor lock-in, and so we picked Kubernetes and open source software like OCI compliant containers. And everything is containerized, and the platform itself, the CI/CD pipeline, the entire stack is containerized, so we can self-update, self-heal. We can be more resilient, and we use infrastructure as code and GitOps to be able to deploy the stack on multiple environments, including classified and public clouds and on-premise edge use case. And you probably have heard that we put Kubernetes on F-16 jets, for example, so it's even running on the jet itself. We created this central repo, the decal repo of containers, which We accredit DoD-wide, so that's an easy way for companies to give us access to their products or to be able to start using open source software. So my team is responsible for accrediting containers DoD-wide and making sure they are hardened and as secure as they can be. And then, of course, we have a baked-in zero trust stack. So we're using something that we call the Sidecar Container Security Stack that uses behavior detection and, of course, zero trust onto the container level. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. We use a service mesh, and for people that don't know what a service mesh is, once people move to microservices, very critical to be able to have this concept of a mesh, east-west traffic between the containers, so we can decouple teams, which enables scale and avoid having to share libraries between teams. So the mesh is deployed as a sidecar container, so it's run alongside the team's containers to be able to bring features like encryption, authentication, load balancing, and many more features and security as well. So that's a critical piece to enable teams to be decoupled and scale with thousands of people across programs and be able to follow the two pizza rule of Agile. And so that's really a critical piece. We created two teams, Cloud One and Platform One. So Cloud One is the team building the cloud infrastructure and compute and storage. That's really Azure and Microsoft behind it. And then we have Platform One, which deploys DevSecOps environments on anything. Could be on the F-16 jet, could be on the cloud, could be on-premise, on classified clouds. So that's the team that's responsible to enable the different DoD programs not to have to reinvent the wheel, building a custom stack from scratch. And so that's a big enabler. We estimate having saved for every program, every 5 years, we're saving 18 months of time by using DevSecOps. So that's a massive impact on schedule and obviously delivery of capabilities and enabling the warfighter get access to better technology faster. So we have a concept in DoD called Authority to Operate, ATO. That's an accreditation process of software that can take anywhere from 8 months to a year and a half. And so obviously that's a massive pain, having to accredit the software for every release. We created the concept of the continuous ATO that uses the DevSecOps principle and the gates we put in the pipeline and continuous monitoring gates in runtime using the sidecar stack we talked about to be able to automate that process continuously every day, multiple times a day. So the software is continuously accredited and we don't pile on technical debt. So that's been a critical enabler to be able to move at the pace of relevance. So that's one of the foundation pillar of DevSecOps for us. We also have to train quite a few people. So we have 100,000 people this year we have to train. So we are betting on self-learning training and not classes. Obviously, we're not going to find enough people anyway to train 100,000 people. So we are partnering with a few companies to bring commercial curriculums and also access to cloud. So it's not in a vacuum. They can learn watching the videos and the content and then do the stuff on the cloud so they can put it to practice at the same time. And then, of course, we want to help teams write better contracts. And so we released guidance and template clauses on the website for teams to reuse and bringing new agile contracting language, including being able to buy capacity and predefined requirements, so teams can be flexible in assigning work to the teams based on priorities and grooming the backlogs. And so all that is now publicly available, and that's everything we do is actually open source and accessible on that website. So always feel free to go check it out. We have a bunch of training content, including videos and more French accent stuff because you're going to hear my accent again on those videos. That's okay. Put it as subtitles, and then you can check the DSOP document page where you're going to find all the publication, including reference architecture designs, and quite a lot of information, including the link to the repo for containers, which is also open source, which you can also use for your own companies, and feel free to contribute back. It's all the community, so you can also send merge requests to our source code to make the containers better, and everyone benefit from that. We already have dozens of teams outside of DoD using the containers, including the commercial industry with Amadeus, with JP Morgan, Citibank, with Lowe's, and federal agencies like DOJ, FBI, IRS, DHS, so DOI, so multiple teams across the government, but also on the commercial side as well. So feel free to go and check it out and check the links of the repos. You're going to find the source code side and the binary side as well to download the signed binaries. Wanted to show why containers matter here, and why we want to have complete automation and no drift between environments. We have thousands of programs deploying different pipelines based on different needs. We're supporting 16 programming languages, 23 databases, and so on. So every team has different needs and different languages they're going to be using, and so everything is containerized, and we deploy the whole stack you see. And that's just one example of one team, right? You could easily find. I think we have 172 containers on the repo that we're going to be supporting for the MVP. So in this case, you can see that everything from the planning and development phase to the building and the testing to the cyber scanning and particularly the continuous monitoring aspect is also critical. So for us, we don't think static dynamic analysis is DevSecOps. It's just DevOps. DevSecOps for us is the continuous monitoring piece and runtime. So we use solutions like Twistlock or Sysdig, StackRox for container runtime monitoring, which does behavior detection. We use Encore as well to be able to scan the containers during build and create policies for instead of threat and more granular policies on containers. And so, but the critical piece is really the behavior detection. And so we use Istio for the Surveymash, which is open source, to be able to enforce zero trust down to the container level and the function. We also support Knative, which is on top of Kubernetes, which is bringing function as a service concepts to Kubernetes, and it's abstracted, so it's not Lambda, which is locked into Amazon, so it can be used anywhere, including on the jet and in places where there's no Amazon. So very important for us to be abstracted. Everything we do is abstracted with a layer of abstraction, ideally open source, so we can push back patches upstream and make sure that we can be as secure as possible as a community. So a very critical piece there. So as you can see, when you have all these Lego blocks and different products you have to update, if you don't use containers and you're running all these on VMs, that's going to be a massive undertaking. And so we have a moving target defense approach. We kill containers every 4 hours. So it self-updates if there's a new update, or it just goes back to the immutable state, so we know we're not drifting environments. Of course, there is no downtime because we use rolling updates with Kubernetes, so there's no impact for the users. But that gives us the ability to know that the source code is our source of truth, and it's everything that we care about. And so the source code becomes the crown jewel of the state of the system, and every change is a source code change. We don't have people in production applying patches or making changes in production. It is all driven by the pipeline. So the pipeline will, you'd have a code change with a merge request approved by usually more than one person based on the risk. So there's a 2 set of eyes or 3 set of eyes for nuclear systems, for example, and then that triggers the pipeline, passes the test, passes the cyber scan, and then deploys to production using a GitOps model. So just so people realize the value of the layers, in this case, we have multiple layers that we are pushing, and we have the infrastructure layer, that's the cloud infrastructure and compute, and then we have the platform layer, that's the Kubernetes cluster. That could be Kubernetes distributions like Rancher or PKS or AKS, EKS or OpenShift or whatever, and we are supporting those, and we're providing the infrastructure as code to deploy distributions of Kubernetes to the team so they can pick the one they like. And then we have a CI/CD pipeline on top, which is really a bunch of containers and Lego blocks. And then you have the Surveymash, which is Istio. And then you have the application layer, the delta between the teams. The continuous monitoring piece is, monitoring the entire stack on the left. That gives us the ability to know what's going on in terms of not just CV scanning, but also behavior detection. So I think I explained a little bit about why we pick containers. We have this slide. Again, just to summarize quickly, we want to avoid vendor lock-in. We want to benefit from the open source community, so we can separate orchestration from networking, storage, and all that. Containers are mutable, so we can accredit them and know that they're going to behave the same way on different environments. If it's running on Kubernetes, we know exactly the resiliency we're getting thanks to the self-healing and the immutable state of the containers. And then we have this baked-in security because we automatically inject the sidecar stack, so the sidecar is running alongside every container, and that gives us the ability to inject a proxy with Istio, which is Envoy, which brings mutual TLS tunnel across the entire stack, certificate per container, per pod, so we know who is doing what, and we whitelist traffic. So container A to talk to B has to be whitelisted on both sides using Istio. So that's really reduce the attack surface, and we can control that better. And plus, we end up killing containers frequently, and so that also reduce the ability for a bad actor to move laterally across the system. So between the zero trust and the moving target defense, that's pretty cool. And then you add the flexibility with the Lego blocks that you can swap around and be able to do rolling updates and load balancing, A/B testing, canary release, and then of course automation thanks to infrastructure as code and GitOps, and then the auto scaling thanks to Kubernetes to scale based on compute memory needs, and of course the abstraction layer. So for us, we have a few key ingredients for DevSecOps. One is the abstraction that we talked about, the GitOps infrastructure as code, so everything is code, including configuration changes, networking changes. There's not a single thing that's not code. Even the documentation of the PDFs or whatever we do is source code in the repo. So everything is code. So we know the state of the system by looking at the code in the master branch. Hardened containers, so we don't just use containers from Docker Hub. We have our supply chain management risk with hardened containers, and of course we have static dynamic analysis, bill of material supply chain scanning, and container security scanning, and then we Monday an EFK stack. So we have Elasticsearch, Fluentd, Kibana for centralized logging and telemetry. So we aggregate logs for every cluster centrally, so we know what's going on. We can have automated alerting and zero trust baked in, and then behavior detection, which goes way beyond the CV scanning. And then finally, we have some chaos engineering, so we can crash stuff to see how resilient systems are, and that's piggybacking on what Netflix has been doing for a few years. So obviously, you guys love Agile like all of us, and we are prime proponents of flexibility and being able to decouple teams. So we're moving to microservices, even for a weapon system like a jet or nuclear system or space system. We're cutting teams into smaller teams, 2 pizza rule, so we can feed the team with 2 pizzas. And of course, there's still a need of coordination between product owners. That doesn't have to trickle down to the team. The key is to be able to groom your backlog across teams, so you can prioritize big changes and themes and epics. But it doesn't have to be an impediment to the team's capacity and creating useless meetings. So we are pushing for more flexible frameworks that don't come with 450 pages of certifications. And even though the DoD was really kind of the prime customer of frameworks like SAFE, and there are others as well, but SAFE is a good example of something that was not designed initially with DevSecOps in mind, because it was obviously created before. And even though back in the day, it did make sense to have these release planning trains and all that kind of stuff, that just does not make any sense when it comes to continuous delivery of capability using microservices. And the whole point of all of this is to actually not coordinate releases. And so there's a lot of issues that we see with SAFE right now. That's why we are I wrote a memo highly discouraging the use of these kind of frameworks if being used in a DevSecOps environment. Of course, for teams moving just from waterfall to agile, that could still be useful, but we're trying to move them straight from waterfall to DevSecOps, skipping all the steps in the middle. And so part of the big push is, one, want to make sure before you scale that you understand the basics. So there's nothing to scale until you are there. And that includes contracting and program management and reporting to the leadership. So it's not water agile full or whatever. So you want to make sure that the entire team is moving to an agile framework, and if you can scale if you know the basics right. And of course, one of the issues we see is when big, complex framework, very rigid, one-size-fits-all concepts are pushing only one method, that becomes an issue, because the idea of the foundation of Agile is really about be able to pick what works and get the job done, and not have these very stringent limitations. And it's very important to keep that in mind when you pick any framework, that you pick what's good for you to use, and what you don't want to use, that you just cannot use it. And that's a critical concept. And so if you look at that slide, you'll see that we're trying to also point out that the main goal of building software is not to be safe. If you want to be safe, you actually do nothing and you just sit there, and that's going to be very safe. If you want to innovate, you have to take risks. The whole point is to fail fast, but don't fail twice for the same reasons. And so we want to learn fast. Failing is good if you do it fast and you learn from it, so you can actually move fast and move at a pace of relevance. If the whole concept was to be safe, then you're probably in the wrong business and you should not be writing software. But again, safe is really pushing that kind of concept. So for us, we obviously take security very seriously. It's one of the prime pillar of software in DoD, but it's not the main goal, right? The main goal is to be able to bring new capabilities to the warfighter and be able to keep up with China and Russia. If you want to be safe, we probably don't want to write software to begin with. So continuous learning, fail fast, don't fail twice for the same reasons. Small incremental changes, don't pile your technical debt, cut your teams, decouple them, coordinate backlogs across product owners. So you do need some type of product owner management concept, Scrum of Scrum, whatever, right? There's a bunch of frameworks that help coordinate, the coordination between product owners, but that should not touch the development teams. That's a bad best practice. So also, we're looking at what the commercial side is doing. Companies like Netflix, Microsoft, Google, right? These kind of companies, if they're not using something, pretty sure I would not be using it. So we just want to make sure we're not special, even though the DoD's mission is special, the software is not. And so we want to use the same best practice in the commercial side. So I see a few questions. I'm gonna stop here for a second to take a few questions, and then we'll go back to the slide. So can you share the data that supports the claim that no successful commercial organization uses SAFE? Well, you know, it's obviously very subjective. I think we looked at, it depends how you define, you know, successful commercial organization. Again, we said successful software commercial organization, not just commercial organization. That's a little difference here. You probably can find, you know, banks and other companies that can use it in some fashion. It doesn't mean they are a software company. We're looking at really, you know, companies that are, the main mission is to write software. And so we looked at the big guys, you know, and we asked every CIO that we work with across DoD, which is touching pretty much every company out there across DoD. So, and we did not find one that was either staying on SAFE or moving to SAFE or using SAFE. That includes the Google, the Microsoft, the Netflix, the Facebook, the, you know, whatever, quite a few companies. Then next question was, can I elaborate on the comment of the goal of software is to innovate and create? In your experience, the goal of moving to a lean, agile way of working is to deliver more value to the customer sooner at a pace that can sustain and improve. Yes, while you agree that innovation and creativity are necessary elements, is there not a risk that they represent activity as opposed to value delivery is the other sole focus? Yeah, so I think you're right. You know, it's just the probably using the right terms, and you're probably right. We can probably phrase this in a better way. But, you know, when we use the terms innovate is obviously innovation not done in a vacuum, right? The innovation that will bring tangible value to the end user. There's no innovation that it's not innovation, I guess, if it doesn't do that. So it's a prime, obviously, factor in everything we do. It's all about the warfighter. But you're right. We could precise that. For us, you know, innovation is by definition something that benefits the warfighter. You're obviously right. And Microsoft has a large SAFE implementation. That is not true whatsoever. In fact, you know, I talked to the CEO of Microsoft, and while they do have teams using SAFE, and Microsoft is a big team, this is not a direction where Microsoft is moving, to be clear. So that came straight from the top. Isn't it a case of horses for courses? What may work for one organization won't necessarily work for another. Choice of a scaling model is just one of many factors. That's absolutely true. There is not one size fits all. In fact, that's why we say, you know, pick the best framework that's best for you. Just try to avoid framework that are prescriptive and rigid, and really tell you what to do, when to do it, and think they know better than you do what's good for your team. So we like, obviously, you know, the Agile Manifesto was 1 page, 12 bullet points. Anything that turns into 450 pages is, for me, by definition, anti-Agile. Let's see what else. Let's see what the question is.
Nicolas, this is Gene. Feel free to pace yourself as you wish. We have a few collected questions from before, and I'll give it to you if you have time at the end. But you're pacing yourself, basically, as you wish.
Sure, no problem. I do one more. I see, how do you change the mindset of the people, especially when they think they know it already? That's a good point. You know, it's always about what we don't know, right? So if you don't know what you don't know, how do you end up knowing that you're doing something wrong? And I think that's pretty much the case with a lot of the teams we meet. They think they're doing Agile. They think that's what they learned. They never actually have truly done Agile in a meaningful way. They just don't know better. Particularly when it comes to DoD, when teams have been doing waterfall for 20, 30 years. They just rename terms, and now it's a sprint. It's a 6-month sprint. So it's often about maturity level. So the key, I think, is training and leading by example and showing the what is common and not come with too many mandates. I show a few key principles in terms of decoupling teams and small teams and domain-driven design, user-centered design, all these kind of concepts, test-driven development, and at least show that it exists and show what's being done. Bring CIOs of many companies, including banks and other companies that are innovating and using Agile the right way to show that. We went to SpaceX, went to Tesla, right? So showing that yes, SpaceX mission is very aligned with the DoD use case. It's better than the Facebook. People don't relate when it comes to Facebook, for example, when you talk to DoD people. So very important that you find the right use case and right example, and then bring the training, bring the pair programming or whatever you need to do to train the people to show them the way and scale. But anything that tells you in too much details what to do is usually not a good thing, because there's no one size fits all. So we're trying to bring very few mandates and a very broad option. In fact, I didn't even say, we're banning SAFe. We say we highly discourage it. That doesn't mean it cannot be used by teams, right? That's another example of making sure we don't mandate things that are sometimes not right for the teams. So always to keep that in mind, I think it's critical. Let's see, I'm going to go back to the slide and then see a few more questions after that. So just wanted to show a little bit about the Istio architecture. And yes, everything will be not only recorded in the slides as well. So they're also on the website that I sent. The second slide of all the PowerPoints. So Istio, just to give you a little bit of background on that, the service mesh is actually a critical piece that actually enables us to have decoupled teams. If you have teams using different programming languages, they're going to have to synchronize libraries and authentication mechanism and discovery mechanism between microservices and APIs and encryption mechanism, and that's just bad practice. If you move to a service mesh, that is provided by a sidecar container, which is not inside of the team's boundary, and that's always injected by Kubernetes, and that's always there, so they get all that for free. So that brings a ton of capabilities, including dynamic routing, layer 7 load balancing, zero trust, east-west traffic whitelisting, access control, role-based access control, and TLS encryption, key management signing, all that kind of stuff. So all of that is what enables teams not to have to coordinate releases, right? If you don't have that, then it's going to be a problem, because you can have libraries being released within microservices, and now you have to coordinate releases. So again, it's all about maturity level, back to the SAFe conversation. If you don't have the right tools and the right tech stack, and you're not pushing the modern stuff, it's going to be very difficult to decouple teams and scale. And that's where you end up, building a lot of gates and a lot of org chart structure that will just become an impediment to your growth and to your pace, right? So it's just about the right balance between tech and people and process, right? And obviously that touched back to the maturity model we talked about. I would say without a mesh, it's very difficult to do what we do. So it's a mandated layer in our teams. Infrastructure as code is also another big enabler, right? So if you think about the concept of DevSecOps and having this immutable state and no drift between environments, even more for us when we have, classified multiple classification layers and environments of multiple classification layers. We want to have the same, platform across all these programs, all these environments, on-premise, edge, cloud, disconnected. So that's a critical enabler to have that infrastructure as code available in the repo that's replicable, automated, with all the playbooks and networking rules and tests and configurations settings. Very important. So a lot of people still don't know what GitOps is. So Git repo, GitHub, GitLab, whatever, ops operations. The key concept is the source code is a source of truth, and that enables teams to know that the branch is what should be in production. So having that infrastructure platform and application layer in source code and all the networking and secrets, seal secrets, not unencrypted secrets, that would be pretty bad. Don't do that. And then of course having this consistent deployment. So GitOps, you have tools like Algo CD and Flux that are merging, becoming part of the CNCF. The Air Force is also a member of CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, like Kubernetes. And so we are also pushing that kind of concept. And really what it does is it pulls from the source code repo from that branch to deploy that state into the Kubernetes cluster. So no human in production, no ports open, no SSH, no command line. We get, of course, telemetry and logs, and we have monitoring there with a team and behavior detection, but we don't have people making change in production. They will make change in the source code, which will trigger the pipeline to redeploy the whatever the change that you just made. So very important as well. Same concept, right? Again, that's back to maturity level. Some people are not there yet, and some people understand the security benefit of having a pull versus push. So your Jenkins or GitLab CI or whatever it is you're using for CI/CD does not have the keys to connect to your Kubernetes cluster. The cluster pulls from the source code repo and not the other way around, right? So that's a security thing as well. So that was my last slide. We have a ton of slides on the website. So of course, feel free to cover and go over all this content on the website. It's all publicly facing. Love to answer some questions. Do you want to pick the questions for me, or do you want me to pick questions, Gene, on the list? And if you're talking, you're muted. All right, I'm just going to pick questions. That's what I'm going to do. So the website, I'm going to post it just on the chat so you can see the link. So let's see. I'm going to scroll. There's quite a few questions. In your journey to current Air Force model, were the example of teams following anti-pattern, like closed repos, consistently rejecting pull requests, or rebuilding other teams' work due to lack of trust in their solution? If so, how did you handle them? So yeah, I mean, it's even worse than that, right? Most teams didn't even have a repo. We didn't even have the source code, and many times we were paying companies to write code 20 times, because we didn't even ask for the IP or access to the source code, right? So it started even worse than what you probably think. So we actually did a lot of work to provide these environments. So that's why Platform One can bring to these teams that don't have any of that stuff, the environment to put the source code and trust it. And of course, the training component was critical. And it's certainly not a journey that's finished. I can tell you that we have, thousands of people, if not millions of people still not there. So it's going to be a multi-year journey to get them there with us. And it's certainly not finished, but it's a pretty big win already within 16, 18 months. So that's pretty exciting. And it's all about visibility, right? I think if you can't see and you can trust, you won't trust the code if you don't know the process, right? So if you see that the code is passing the test, passing the scanning results and all that, and has, you know, decent test coverage of unit testing, integration testing, and all that kind of stuff, you're more likely to trust the code coming out of the pipeline. So, for example, we see a massive adoption of our containers because people know the process, know it was approved, know it's done right, and very transparent and very open. So, the more you're going to see teams having, you know, trying to obfuscate or hide stuff, the more you're less likely to trust it. And yeah, 6-month sprint is a marathon, not a sprint. You're right. I recommend 2-week sprints in the Air Force, just so you know. Okay, what's my opinion of trunk-based development? So again, you know, I think, you know, I have my personal opinion. You know, I think we wanna obviously have this single source of truth. We're doing branches, of course, because when we do new releases or new capabilities, since we're using GitOps, if we push it to the master branch, it gets straight into production. So, of course, we have this single source code repo, but we have also divided the repos into microservices, and even we cut the Docker files from the Kubernetes manifest. So we have kind of least privilege implementation there for cyber risk. So, you know, I'm all about making sure we don't have a one-size-fits-all when it comes to that kind of decision, because each team may have different requirements. You know, you can compare deploying to an F-16 jet or F-35 with a cyber offense defense system or a business, you know, ERP system. So I usually don't kind of go into that level of detail in terms of mandating or, you know, promoting things. It's obviously more broader principle like GitOps, right? And then we give architecture designs an example, and you'll see on the website we have the reference design showing the how we architect the system.
Nicolas, this is Gene. I just lost connection and regained it again. There are some questions I posted in the chat that were collected from prior inquiries from various.
Yes, I see it now.
You know, take it in order as you wish.
Yep. So I'm going to take that. So in the declassified Ask Me Anything report, there is mentioning that until there is something good to scale, there should be no attempt to scale up. Safe implementations are top-bottom. They're often installed on the top, not well functioning basics of Scrum or Kanban. People are told that they must do safe because someone made a decision. Yes, that's true. What kind of assessment did safe go through at Air Force? Who was involved? Internal coaches, teams, other. Can you elaborate? So, well, you know, I think we had dozens of teams starting to implement safe in different ways, and I think you're very much right. I think initially it started not by the teams pushing the model, but because the leadership didn't know Agile and thought safe sounded cool, you know, both in terms of safe means no risk, so you're good, and also because they get all the same metrics and same buzzwords are used to seeing in Waterfall. So it maps and it looks perfect and doesn't look like a big disruption. So that's very easy for DoD leadership to say, you know, let's use that, even though they had no understanding of what Agile is, right? So that's obviously the problem, right? If your users, which are your developers, are not excited about using something, you know you're doing something wrong, probably, right? So there's a balance, though, because, of course, some don't care about cyber, and we need cyber, right? So it's all about putting the line in the sand somewhere. In terms of assessments, we had multiple projects, and we look at results. I didn't really look at what I thought because I didn't even know SAFE. You know, I've been doing business for 20 years. I founded 12 companies, and I never heard of SAFE before I started in DoD. So when I started DoD, I was like, huh, what is this, right? I never heard of it. And I work with, companies like Google, Microsoft, and never heard of it. So I had to look into it and wait a little bit of, let a little bit of time and see the delivery and the metrics, right? So we use the DORA metrics, mean time to production, recovery, all that for DevSecOps, and look at the capacity and the user points delivered by teams and see improvements. And we were saying nothing, right? Just terrible results. We had programs, like I said, waste up to 65% of their capacity in useless documentation, right? So coordination meetings, so it was just not what I was used to seeing on the commercial side, and the number of people we had in these teams and the pipeline coming out of those teams was so thin. I just couldn't help to start digging into it. And after 2 months, it became quite clear that it was just not working. And it might not just be the safe issue, right? I think it's teams moving straight from waterfall on a freaking weapon system, which is already pretty difficult, and move straight. It's like you start day one on one of the hardest problem on the planet, right? A weapon system like a nuclear system, and you go from waterfall to safe, right? So by definition, it's going to fail. Let's put them on the mobile app, that's not going to kill anybody, and then you can actually learn and then move to weapon systems, right? So it's also one of the problems, right? So it's not just safe, right? But safe is just not helping because it's opinionated, it's one size fits all, it's too big, it's a book, right? The certification process is painful, and I understand, people spend time and money to get a certification and they freak out that, we're saying don't use it. And I get that. There's a market behind it, there's, a business behind it. But the fact is we have to look at what's best for the warfighter and for the taxpayer. If you're a U.S. citizen, you care, you're paying taxes, and you want your taxes, like mine, to be spent wisely and delivering value and not dead weight. And so that was, obviously one of the critical factors for us, looking at the capacity of the teams and the delivery of the teams. Okay, so that's going to be my answer for that one.
This is Gene, just a small attempt to facilitate. I know this is a very touchy subject for many, of course, in the scale in this world, this will become a very many. So obviously, as we discussed before, we don't want to digress and we don't want to.
Yeah, and your audio is just cutting off, so I'm just going to take more questions because we're losing you. Can everybody else hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. I think it's
okay.
Gene's connection.
I lost connection.
Okay.
Again.
Yeah. You should dial in with your phone.
The floor is yours. I was just going to say there are some questions.
Yeah, we can't hear you. You should dial in with your phone, so that way if your connection is bad, we can still hear you. Okay, so let's see other questions. U.S. Air Force is part of the military. Yes. It is a government agency. Yes. Let's see what the question is actually here. How does the Air Force address not a single team? Yeah, so obviously we have a very complex team structure. We have primes that have subs, multiple contractors. We even have airmen now writing code. So it's all of the above, and it's obviously one of the most complex problem because they also build very complex systems. But anything can be cut and cut small, and as long as you don't have this throwing over the fence concept of delivering software to someone that will integrate it like we used to do in DoD, we are moving to this kind of centralized CI/CD concept where the source code will be merged into that single source of truth, and that can be the place where delivery is done. Definition of done is passing the test, unit testing, integration testing, and all that kind of stuff. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. Everything can be cut and everything can be decoupled. It's just a matter of maturity and using the right tech stack to do that. And there is a great question on that. How do you ensure that a distributed architecture keeps growing without overarching control within the boundary and of security, scalability, and all that? And how are teams managing cross-teams dependencies that may depend or affect the overall architecture? So that's where domain-driven design and really understanding domains and decoupling and cutting monolithic applications is critical. I think a lot of people, and honestly, one of the number one issue we're facing is finding the talents, the architects, the cloud-native architects that understand DDD, domain-driven design, that understand how to take a monolithic application and cut it right. Because if you cut it wrong, you're going to see that again and again, and it's going to become an impediment to your success, right? And you're going to be in that situation of, teams overlapping and needing to, coordinate. That's really a good sign that you cut it wrong and that you have to either merge the teams or cutting differently. But if you design an architecture using the domains correctly and ideally write events, pub/sub, model, where, teams can listen to events and react to events like, Amazon is doing with, thousands, if not, tens of thousands of microservices. That's how you end up decoupling, and often it's a sign that you have this issue of badly cutting the stack. And if also you don't use a service mesh, like I said, that's where the security coordination becomes a problem, right? If the service mesh is injected as a sidecar, it's going to be there. And having a platform team to support all the teams and centrally assessing the platform, the scanning of the containers, all that, and enabling all these teams not to do that, right? So they can focus on writing mission software and do their job instead of building a platform so they can write software. That was a critical enabler for us, right? Having that platform one team that can write that platform and make it available as a managed service to any team on different classification systems. That was obviously the big win for us. It's an enterprise, capability. So it doesn't mean teams don't talk to each other, right? It just means they should not have to be able to deliver their microservice. Of course, product owners will have to coordinate and know what's going on and know the priorities of the business and know, that epics and themes can be prioritized and things can change, right? That's a given, right? We're not saying the product owners shouldn't talk. We're saying that the teams doing the work, the code, shouldn't have to coordinate, and coordinate release is a disgrace, right? It's anti CI/CD, and you should have a team that if they want to deliver a microservice 20 times a day, they can do that, right? If one just wants to do once a week, they can do that too, right? So very important.
Nicolas, there were some questions about vendor management aspect. I hope I'm audible. It came up a few times. Would you mind elaborating that? Does United States Air Force IT rely on external vendors? And if so, any implications of that? And maybe a few.
Yeah, everything we do is mostly done by external vendors, right? So we have a very small workforce that actually does write software. Everything we do is done by the big primes, sub to the smaller companies. So we have, probably 250,000, at least contractors writing software for us. So we're probably one of the largest organizations when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? So obviously that's where it comes to training and helping the companies that are a little bit behind understand this and bringing it as an enterprise service for them to consume it. So we don't have to wait for each company to build their own Kubernetes stack and their own containers and their own stack. That helps a lot in the adoption as well. So that was a prime enabler of these companies moving to DevSecOps. And there was a question on if we studied safe or just followed the experts. After I woke up back after my heart attack when I saw the book of Safe and 400 pages, and I then recovered from that shock. I did obviously study it, and then we also looked at results and teams, and it was fairly clear that it was designed and built in a pre-DevSecOps CI/CD world, the microservice world, and so we're working with a Safe. The company, right, and the CEO to see how we could adjust, past Safe 5.0, some of the language, or maybe even do a separate thing that could help with DevSecOps and have that as a prime central focus and not just an afterthought add-on, because that's always the issue when even for companies, right, that are trying to move legacy to DevSecOps. It's obviously harder if you have, legacy software than greenfield, using the new cool stuff, right? So, but the new cool stuff will become legacy in a few years too, right? So it's always like that. Keeping up with the pace of IT is going to be more and more difficult. So we're trying to see and coordinate with the company that's behind Safe to see how we could at least set a few guidelines to know that this is going to align with the vision that the DevSecOps community has for DevSecOps. We also went and talked to, I would say, at least 15 of the key people behind Agile, both in terms of the one that signed the manifesto and people like Jin Kim and others that are, kind of behind the Agile community and created the whole concept, right? And I did not hear a single one of them saying that we should use it. So that was also, it wasn't just me waking up and making the decision. In fact, we have a link on the slide deck with their quotes. So each one of them gave a quote. Let's see. How do you do contracting and budgeting in an agile manner? That's a great question. So we buy.
Check.
Yep, 4 minutes. So we buy contracts. So we buy capacity. So instead of buying predefined requirements and spending time on writing a detailed scope of work, what we do is we buy capacity. So we buy people and their time. We buy skill sets and predefined definition of done. So we say, okay, you have to deliver the code with test coverage up to X%. You have to pass the cyber scans, and you need to build, following a microservice pattern on Kubernetes and containers and all that. And we give an example of an MVP, so they know pretty much what the MVP is going to be about. But we make it clear that the scope of work will change, and they're going to be building different things. And we pretty much buy people with skill sets, so we cut it into different type of kind of job descriptions, Kubernetes experts, application development experts, right? So microservice, Java, Python, Go, right? Cyber SMEs, right? So we cut into different type of roles, and then we buy people, and that gives us capacity that we align to story points, and then we groom the backlog according to the points and t-shirt sizing and all that. So we have a lot of clauses. On the last link on the website, on the DSUB document page, has that's available for you guys to reuse if you want to reuse some of the language for contracting. A word or two on AI. So we are using QFlow. So QFlow runs on top of Kubernetes. QFlow is open source. It brings the stack from Microsoft and Google and OpenAI and all that. About 50 plus containers integrated and as a complete automated pipeline training and servicing of models. It supports, TensorFlow and all the cool stuff, machine learning, deep learning, all that. And so we use QFlow to enable scientists to build their pipeline with, Jupyter Notebook and all that stuff. So it's all on Kubernetes. So I recommend you look at QFlow. That's open source as well. That's what we use. All right.
Nicolas,
yep.
Thank you very much. I think we have T-minus 2 minutes, and I want to make sure you have your closure before everyone starts dropping.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a special closure. I just want to thank everybody for their time. We are doing Ask Me Anything sessions every usually 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So it's on the software.f.mil website under the event section. You're going to see the dates of the next events. So always, feel free to join us. It's open to everybody. Of course, we have a lot of DoD people joining, but you can certainly come if you have more questions. I recommend people look at the documents we have on the website. It's all open to everybody. So reference design architecture and all that. There's 2 recorded Ask Me Anything sessions on the website that explain a little bit more detail on a lot of the stuff we're doing as well. So if you want to listen to that, there's a lot of good information there. And then you're going to see under the training section, you have a lot of training content as well. So always we don't selected or selected a subset of videos on YouTube for different levels of maturity. So if you're starting Kubernetes or you're starting Surveymash, we have introduction videos that help to understand what it is about and the value of it. And then if you're more an expert, we have expert video to show you the next gen stuff we're doing. So if you want to look at that, feel free to go on the website.
And Nicolas, of course, just to help you as much as I can. If you don't mind sharing this with me, like soft links, I would like to amplify that. And
sure.
2 more things. People obviously have asked many times. The slides. I have the deck. Is this the most updated deck that I'm entitled to share with others?
Yep, and there's a bigger deck also on the website as well. So
excellent. It's all on declassified, unclassified, public information. Great. Well, personally, from my own self and from the community, a few communities that I run, I want to thank you and express my sincere gratitude for joining us today. It was a great, very informative discussion, and great information was shared. And hopefully, maybe in a nearby future, we shall see you again presenting and sharing some of the
Absolutely, with pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll give it back to you, and hopefully we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, folks. Let's cut recording.